and welcome back to Trains Up North. In the hobby and the railway industry, we frequently use terms such as ballast and sleepers, and most of us take it for granted that we all know what we mean. But for those who are new to this, it can seem like a foreign language. So today, I'm going to give you my top 10 terms that you might not know. They're not in any particular order. So the first one on my list is chair. No, this isn't something that we're going to sit on, it's what the rail sits on. It's a lump of metal that goes between the rails and the sleepers. They come in various designs depending on the rail type and the era, and also the railway company. The track was traditionally held in place using a wooden key driven into the chair with a hammer. These have largely been replaced by metal clips, and on modern flat bottom rails we use things like pandrol clips. The chairs are fastened to the sleepers using rail spikes or large bolts, and you can still sometimes find wooden keys on heritage railways and things like that, or in sidings, and the wooden keys tend to be used on places such as quite tight curves. Number 2 and 3 on our list is sleepers and ballast. So sleepers are there to spread the weight of the trains into the ballast, and they also keep the rails at the desired distance apart. This is known as the gauge. Traditionally, sleepers would have been made out of timber. That could be softwood or hardwood, and they were treated with things like tar and creosote. Now we can get concrete sleepers, steel sleepers, or even sleepers made out of composite materials. Did you know that we can still find some of the original Liverpool-Manchester Railway sleepers? It's true. So during engineering works down at Chat Moss, just outside Earlham in Manchester, some of the original sleepers were found in the bog. Some of these were actually driven vertically as well to help spread the load. This was the first intercity railway in the world, and it opened in 1830. So those sleepers have been there for a pretty long time. The ballast is the stone that keeps the tracks in place. It also provides drainage and spreads the load onto the subsurface below. It comes in different colours and sizes. When it's been there for quite a while, it can look very dirty. On modern railways, you'll see a heaped ballast shoulder. So this is done on welded track, and it just helps give the track a little bit more support when the track's expanding. Traditionally, you didn't have this, and the ballast was fairly flush with the ends of the sleepers. Some people who are modelling in 00 will use N-gauge ballast just because it tends to give a slightly better appearance. For me personally, I use a mix of different ballasts. So I'll use different ballasts from different companies, different scales and sizes, and I'll mix it all together, and I find that works best for me. Fish plates. Another strange term when you think about it, and no, it's not what we put our supper on. So fish plates are pieces of steel plate. So fish plates are there to join sections of track together, and in the UK it was quite common to have rails that were about 60 foot in length. So one plate is placed on each side of the rail. Each plate has 4 holes in it, and then what we do is drill 2 holes through that rail, put a nut and bolt through each hole, and then on the next section of rail, again another 2 holes, another couple of nuts and bolts, and it holds everything securely in place. Now these joints allow for expansion and contraction as the temperature changes, and to aid in this movement what we do is we'll lubricate them. This often gives them a black oily look. If you want to see this, then if you head down to your local heritage railway, they'll probably have some fish plates, and depending on their maintenance regime you could well find that they're quite oily. When we're modelling, the fish plates help to conduct track power from one rail to another. So put the fish plates on the end of the rail, push the next piece of rail in, and it just allows the electric to flow. It also keeps the rail heights correct as well. So if you've ever put track together, misaligned your fish plate, you'll find that you've got a little bit of a ridge and you'll get pouring in there. Personally, I don't rely on the power to flow through the fish plates. I found it to be unreliable. But if you want to do that, it does work, but it could give you issues in the future, so it's better just to solder droppers onto the rail. We also have insulated fish plates made from plastic. As the name suggests, these insulate the rails, preventing power passing from one rail to another. These can be used to create separate sections when we're using analog control, so DC control. Isolated fish plates are also used on electrofrog points, where the polarity in the track can change. I have done a video explaining this, and there should be a link on screen now. On the real railways, isolating fish plates are used. They're still made out of metal, but plastic is used between the fish plate and the rail, with another piece of plastic being used between the two rail ends, and the plastic that we use to do that is shaped so it's the same profile as a track. We do this because of signalling. So where we've got block detection for the signalling, we can separate the track into different sections. The block detection that's used on welded track is slightly different, and that works slightly different, but I'm not going to go into that today. A length of track with the chairs and the sleepers attached is referred to as a panel. So if you hear people referring to a track panel, that's what it is. At 5 we have the 4-foot. Although UK standard gauge railways are 4 foot 8.5, we refer to the bit between the running rails as the 4-foot. I suppose it's a little bit easier than calling it the 4 foot 8.5 every time. We could open a can of worms with gauge, as double O gauge track, if you actually measure it, so measure the gap between the rails, it's not actually correct for UK standard gauge at 4mm to the foot. But that's a whole different video, and I'm not going to go into that today. Facing and trailing points. Now, this appears to confuse people, but it's all to do with what way trains approach the points. And simply, if a train hits the switch blades, also called the point blades, i.e. the moving bits first, it's said to be facing, so it's facing the train. If it hits the frog first, so the bit where the two lines come together in the middle, then it's said to be a trailing set of points. Now, why does this matter? Well, if you're going to be modelling UK prototype and you have a passenger train and it's going over a set of facing points, then it should have a facing point lock, or FPL for short. Granted, in double O this will be a dummy FPL. So the facing point lock, FPL, stops the points from accidentally being moved under a train, which could result in a derailment. It's done by interlocking with the signalling, and it also prevents the signals from being cleared for trains if the points are not locked into position. So what it does is just acts as an extra backup, so signalmen can't pull the points and change them when there's a train going over them, or when the signal's set so that a train can go over them. Note that a facing point lock is not required where passenger trains will only be going over the points in the trailing direction, thus it's a facing point lock, and it's not required for lines that only carry empty passenger stock or freight traffic. So if we derail empty passenger stock or freight trains, we're not bothered, we don't care about that. Mechanical point motors contain both the switching mechanism and the facing point lock in one, so we don't need a separate facing point lock. It's got some electronics in there that detect when it's fully moved and when everything's locked in place. If you're going to be looking at modern image layouts, then you might hear the term OLE or OHLE. This is simply an acronym for overhead line equipment. So what is overhead line equipment? Well, this refers to the wires above the track, the associated masts, pulleys, insulators, etc. that supply power to trains via an overhead cable. In the UK, the overhead power line is energised at 25,000 volts AC, so it's not something to mess around with. So if you want to model this, then I'd suggest doing internet research rather than going out and trying to measure it, because it won't end well. If you want me to cover all the different components, such as registration arms and things like that, and the insulators and things, let me know in the comments below and I can do that video for you. Next, we're going to move on to 6 foot, 10 foot and wide way. So we've looked at the 4 foot, which is the bit between the actual rails. Now, the bit between a pair of running lines is called the 6 foot. When you get 3 or more running lines, the bit between the 2 pairs is often wider. So you'll have the cess, then you'll have the first line with the 4 foot in the middle, then you'll have a 6 foot, then you'll have the second set of lines with the 4 foot in the middle, then the 10 foot or wide way, followed by another set of tracks with the 4 foot, then another 6 foot, another set of tracks with a 4 foot in the middle, and then the cess at the end. These are just terms, and the actual distance does vary depending on factors such as line speed. In double O, what you might want to do is use streamlined track sensors to represent 6 foot, and then set track sensors to represent the 10 foot. Be aware you might need to check the clearance of your trains, especially if you're using streamlined track, as you'll probably need to increase the distance between the lines due to overhang on points and curves and things like that. It's dead easy to do. Pick your longest coach or a loco that's got a really big overhang on the front, and put a pen or pencil on that, and then as you move that round your track, you'll see where the overhang is. And if you do that on both lines, if you've got any bits where the overhang crosses, you know you're going to have an issue there. So I've just mentioned cess. Well, what is the cess? The cess is the bit that runs along the side of the railway, between the ballast shoulder and the line side vegetation. In days gone by, this would have been quite a neat path, sometimes a little bit rough, and it would have been made out of ash and cinders normally, or fine ballast. The reason they used ash and cinders is because it was cheap and they had tons of it. As we moved away from steam and we went towards diesel and electric trains, the cess became a little bit overgrown, and it wasn't uncommon to find sleepers, rails and other bits of detritus left over from engineering possessions amongst the undergrowth, which is always good to trip you up. In recent times, Network Rail have been trying to stop this and stop bits being left here, there and everywhere. So now you might see old sleepers stacked nicely, ready for removal at a later date. It's also really common in the UK to see either new or old rails left in the 4 foot. So if we're going to be replacing rail, we'll drop the new rail in the 4 foot ahead of time, so it's there when we come to do the work. And then at the end of the work, when we put the new rail in, we'll sometimes leave the old rail in the 4 foot ready for collection at a later time. So at least when we put rails in the 4 foot, we can see them and they don't get overgrown, and we don't tend to walk in the 4 foot, so we don't tend to trip over them. So another one that might catch you out is track points. Track points are a set of points that are designed to protect main lines from unauthorised movements. So what they do is they stop trains going out onto a main line when they shouldn't. The track points can be one switchblade or a full set of points. Sometimes you find a sand drag or buffers at the end just to stop trains. So the idea is, when we've got a passenger line and we've got, I don't know, a freight siding, we'll provide trap points at the end so that freight train cannot get onto that passenger line unless it's meant to be going on there, which is really useful when we're shunting and things. So in the UK, we'll provide either a head shunt or trap points. Head shunt is just like a little bit of extra siding, and it does the same job as the trap points, but it also has the benefit that you can shunt trains up into it and keep a loco there. The head shunt or trap points are used at the exit from a siding onto a passenger line. Like I said, it's better to derail a freight train than have a passenger train full of people crash into it. If it's a freight only line that it's going out onto, we don't need trap points. Sometimes you'll get them. So again, freight only, we don't care. You can crash them. It's just passengers we want to protect. Catch points. These often get mixed up with trap points. Catch points are slightly different because they're used on long or steep gradients, and they're there to derail any runaways. They tend to be spring loaded, so that if you're travelling in the correct direction, then the spring will just move and let you ride over them. But if you try and go over them in the wrong direction, you will be derailed. Now, modern automatic brakes should prevent runaways. However, it's not guaranteed because you never know what's happened to the brakes when they've been set up, and there are ways you can actually have a train running where if a wagon breaks free, it would still run away. Shouldn't happen, but it could. Well, that's my top 10. I hope you found this both interesting and informative. If you have, why not give this a like? It shows the YouTube algorithm that my videos are actually okay. Now, like I said, I've covered my top 10. I know there are many, many more out there. So, what's yours? Let me know in the comments section. Don't forget to share the video, subscribe, it's free, and until next time, goodbye.